Hey guys, Michael Kuhn here again. Looks like I'm coming back a little bit sooner with part 2 than I was expecting, but it was brought to my attention by a family friend in the comment section of the first video that the cosmopolitan nature of New York City, Boston, Chicago, LA metros, and the frequency of international travel might help to explain the higher reported case counts. It was actually something that I considered, but not crunch the numbers explicitly, in the name of expediency so that I could release the first video in a more timely manner. However, subsequently, I have ran those numbers examining the top 20 busiest airports in the United States and compared that to a number of my previous variables, with the new calculations being accurate as of May 10th now. According to Share America, which is maintained by the U.S. State Department, the U.S. receives approximately 75 million annual international visitors on the books, of which the top 5 most frequented cities are in order New York City, Miami, Los Angeles, Orlando, and San Francisco. Of those, New York City, Miami, and Los Angeles are also CV hotspots, but Orlando and San Francisco are not. As noted in the last video, San Francisco is also the second most population-dense county in the country, which, given the now 34 deaths, does not concord with either hypothesis. Expanding that out to the other busiest airports, and we can see that there really isn't much correlation between airline passenger volume and cases or deaths. If we remove New York City, to make the numbers more accessible on a linear scale, this really doesn't change for either case either. Nor does it improve when examining them on a logarithmic scale. When comparing airline passenger volume to deaths per population density, which is a proxy for controlling the impact to the existing population that's already there, there's still no real trend. Atlanta, Dallas-Fort Worth, Denver, San Francisco, Orlando, Charlotte, North Carolina, Houston, and Boston are all severely underrepresented in terms of deaths. Now, to be clear, I've also calculated for case per population density, but there was no substantive change in the trend, so I'm showing the more impactful deaths per population density. Besides, as I've said before, the case count I do believe is a lot higher than what was being led on, but that's neither here nor there for now. But to really drive home the point of what an anomaly San Francisco really is, sheer population density aside, housing, plumbing, and illicit substance use issues aside, for the past 20 years, they have had on average 700,000 to 800,000 boardings daily to their public transportation system each and every weekday. While undoubtedly there are people with multiple boardings inflating the average, it is the equivalent of approximately one boarding per capita per day, every day for the past 20 years. Needless to say, there should have been at least some cross-exposure. But that's enough for the transportation-related weirdness. Let's get into the potential problems associated with quarantine itself, which we briefly touched upon at the end of the last video. Social isolation is an independent risk factor for both morbidity and mortality. In fact, the literature suggests that it may be as much or even more of a concern than obesity, blood pressure, physical activity, or smoking. Given that these risk factors have both longer-term causes and generally later life effects, that makes social isolation that much more pertinent a factor to be concerned with. The loss of social contact is associated with increased stress and subsequent disturbances to mental health, immune function, and the gut microbiome. However, it would be overly reductionistic to consider these 4 things to be independent factors. Social relationships play a role in the maintenance of healthy lifestyle behaviors and in the reduction of stress, tension, and anxiety. However, the causal relationship between social isolation, stress, and mental health issues from a physiological perspective is well established and doesn't really need much more expansion here. And fortunately, the potential deleterious effects of social isolation on mental health during CV lockdown is something being actively explored. How that translates from academia to policy is anyone's guess. Right, Tony? Moving on. Alcohol and substance abuse are associated with increased intestinal permeability, decreased microbial diversity, and subsequent systemic inflammation, but the effect appears bidirectional. Why is that important? No reason. While the human literature is wanting, there is ample preclinical research indicating that social isolation and neglect are related to reduced microbial diversity. In humans specifically, however, it has been demonstrated that married couples, particularly those with close relationships, have similar gut microbial profiles, but greater diversity than those living alone. Now sure, married couples get to stay together during the lockdown, but for how long? While we mentioned before how gut dysbiosis is related to the development and progression of mental health and substance abuse disorders, as we said, the gut-brain axis is bidirectional. So, not only do these disturbances cause stress and anxiety, but the psychological, physical, and environmental stressors can induce gut dysbiosis. Why is this important? Well, beyond the role of immune system stimulated by the microbiome in the inactivation of viruses, there might be secondary bacterial infection component to CV. In particular, species belonging to the gram-negative genus Prevotella are being implicated, as they have been found to be overrepresented in CV-positive patients, but unfortunately this is something that is being underexplored. Given the role of the pathogenic overgrowth of Prevotella in development of rheumatoid arthritis and the role of cytokine storm associated in both conditions, there is likely a link in the more severe presentations of the disease. The potential for a secondary infection would also help to explain some of the efficacy seen in individuals receiving the combination of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Oh, and because hydroxychloroquine is being explored because of its use in autoimmune disorders. And what appears on the surface to be some kind of esoteric link, i.e. the use of an anti-malarial drug? Maybe we might be onto something here. However, a couple of days of amoxicillin or azithromycin, the Z-Pak, are sufficient to induce long-lasting changes to the microbiome. Interestingly, the same study, vitamin C appears to also cause negative effects to skin microbial diversity. But again, as both the Z-Pak and vitamin C are being investigated as potential treatments in mitigating the effects of CV, these are particularly relevant. Thus, the effects of social isolation in those who don't get CV, as well as the potential effects of those who do get treatment, are something to consider. And that's without even considering Gil-Bates-Stabby and or the antiviral therapies. Now, as I mentioned the last time, I hope to get final approval on my doctoral thesis any day now. I focus specifically on religious practice, particularly Orthodox Christian fasting and hesychastic prayer in the resolution of the diseases of modern civilization. These are solitary practices that, although not their primary purpose, likely have tangential effects on overall stress reduction and improvements to the microbiome, and subsequently boosting mental health, the immune system. But there is obviously a communal aspect to that as well. But we can't do that because of, social distancing and lack of vaccine. Right, Bill?
In which activities like mass gatherings may be, in a certain sense, more optional. And so until you're widely vaccinated, those may not come back at all.
However, if I am going to give you the biggest takeaway from this one, we need to look beyond just playing a numbers game and the associated fear. That absolutely will lead to negative outcomes. While being mindful of those with compromised immune systems, the rest of us need to step up and ready our bodies for battle. That includes physically, mentally, spiritually, and yes, hopefully we can get by with a little help from our friends. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed this one. Originally I thought this was going to be all over the map, not unlike the population density data, but I think we tied it together alright. Either way, like I said in the last one, be sure to reach out to me with your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next video.